It's good to be with you. A couple of years ago, I had the pleasure of being invited to the conference that was celebrating the 100th anniversary of the founding of the CNT in Barcelona. And I felt, well, I've never been to Barcelona. I've been a libertarian socialist most of my life. It's like a devout Muslim making a trip to Mecca. This is going to be wonderful. Although I've long been a libertarian socialist, I'm the kind of libertarian socialist who has a tremendous admiration for the historical accomplishments of social democracy. Well, here I am in the home of social democracy, and proud to be here, proud to finally get to Stockholm. Swedes were the best social democrats the world has ever seen. Not all versions of capitalism are equally terrible. Anyone who cannot see that social democratic capitalism is preferable to neoliberal capitalism is simply not paying attention. But while fighting for progressive reforms, as social democrats have done probably better than anyone else, makes sense as long as capitalism persists, stopping short of replacing capitalism with a new economic system, a system that is designed to help us carry out the economics of equitable cooperation, makes no sense. Stopping short of replacing the fundamental institutions of capitalism makes no sense for three reasons. The first one is that while social democratic capitalism is less unfair, less insecure, less inefficient, and treads less heavily on the environment than neoliberal capitalism, social democratic capitalism cannot provide full economic justice and democracy or adequately protect the natural environment. So that's the first and the most important reason that we need to go beyond reforming capitalism. The second reason is, as long as productive resources are privately owned by giant corporations with considerable economic and political power, as long as decisions are guided by market forces, as they continue to be under social democratic capitalism, those fighting reforms to make the system more secure, more equitable, more efficient, and more sustainable are basically destined to swim upstream against the destructive currents that are unleashed by the private enterprise market system. Why should we accept this handicap, those of us who engage in those battles? Why should we agree to accept that kind of a handicap? Why should we concede to our opponents more money and bigger megaphones? Now, the third reason that we should not stop short in the 21st century of replacing capitalism, that is, as long as the defining institutions of capitalism are left in place, which is really what the grand social democratic compromise at some point in the middle of the 20th century amounted to conceding, as long as the fundamental institutions of capitalism are left in place, any gains that progressives may win are always at risk of being rolled back. And that's where I think, what I'm saying is immediately painfully apparent to probably everybody in this audience. During the middle third of the 20th century, reformers made headway in many of the advanced capitalist countries, here in Sweden probably more than any place else. And to be honest, people of my generation, born in the aftermath of the Great Depression, we came to view this kind of progress as inevitable, even if frustratingly slow and terribly incomplete. I think we really did. I know that I personally, and many of the people that I grew up with fighting for reforms, thought it's slow, it's frustrating, but history's on our side. We know which direction we're moving in. But during the last 30 years, giant corporations have launched a free market ideological counterattack, rolling back one successful reform after another. Whether it's Greece, Portugal, Spain, Ireland, Italy, the United Kingdom, Canada, the United States, Prudent regulations have been abandoned. Safety nets are being torn asunder. Why? Why is this going on? Well, because the top 1% has the chutzpah to use a crisis their neoliberal policies helped create to continue to prosper at the expense of the bottom 99% in one advanced capitalist country after another. Basically, failing to disarm a defeated enemy is not in the field manuals that good generals follow, which is what leaving the private enterprise market system in place amounts to. Now, participatory economics and participatory planning, what does it have to do with sort of the struggle in terms of moving forward? I'll tell you who said this in a minute. Many of you may recognize the quote. Capitalism is not a success. It is not intelligent. It is not beautiful. It is not just. It is not virtuous. And it doesn't deliver the goods. In short, we dislike it. We are beginning to despise it. But when we wonder what to put in its place, we are extremely perplexed. John Maynard Keynes said that in the late 1930s. Well, one way to think about this model of a participatory economy, and in particular the part I'm going to talk about today, the participatory planning process. It's an answer for any who today, like Lord Keynes 80 years ago, find themselves increasingly disgusted with capitalism, but perplexed about what to put in its place. Alec Nove threw down the gauntlet, famous British political economist, who wrote in 1983 in his book, The Economics of Feasible Socialism. You can have a market economy, or you can have some system of authoritarian planning. There is no third way. There is no alternative. Fundamentally, there are only two ways to coordinate a modern economy, and those are the two ways. And that's what you have to choose between. And you are wasting your time, and you are essentially wasting your time if you somehow end up not fighting for the best alternative, which basically is social democratic capitalism in his view, because somehow you think something else is possible, because it's not. Well, that is what I call the Tina defense. The Tina defense basically says there is no alternative. So it doesn't matter how dissatisfied you are with the thing it is, the options that are in front of you. It's not very strategic to not fight for the best option because somehow you're holding out for something that is in fact impossible. So another way to think about what's this model of a participatory economy, it's an answer to Alec Nove. It's an answer to Keynes, who was extremely perplexed. It's an answer to Alec Nove, who says, I'm not perplexed at all. I know there's only two ways to organize economies. The people who are fools are the people who think there is an alternative, there is a third way. And Michael Albert and I are sort of stubborn type people. We don't like being told something we think might be possible and would be highly desirable is impossible. And that was actually the origins of why, what motivated us to sit down in the late 1980s and say, okay, so Alec Nove says it's impossible. Just because somebody says it's impossible doesn't really mean it's impossible. Let's see whether we can explicitly come up with an answer. Can we create an economy? Can we design an economy and describe exactly how it would go about making all the decisions that have to be made? Sort of a rigorous economic model that economists can analyze and look at the incentive compatibility of various features. Can we design one that is clearly not central planning, not authoritarian planning, and not a market system? And then at least we can talk about it, instead of having somebody like Alec Nove say, it's not even worth discussing. Don't even think about it. Well, first let's think about learning from our mistakes a little bit. What can those of us who want to replace the economics of competition and greed with the economics of equitable cooperation in the 21st century learn from those who struggled to build socialist economies in the 20th century? I think we should embrace our forebears' goals: economic justice, economic democracy. And these are basically the goals of a participatory economy. And when Michael Albert and I originally sat down to try and think this through, we said, well, let's start by getting clear about what we'd like the economy to actually accomplish. What do we want what do we want the economy to deliver? What are the features or the goals that we'd like to actually achieve? And we didn't have them written down exactly this way in the beginning, but now this, after 20 years, with lots of help from other people, this is sort of a very coherent, easy to explain list of goals that this economy is, that we're trying to find an economy, a way of making economic decisions and organizing economic decisions that would actually accomplish all this. Well, when you look at this, economic democracy, economic justice, solidarity, I'll come back to efficiency, variety. I think that these are essentially the traditional goals of most people who are fighting for something better than capitalism, something they called socialism of this kind or that kind during the 20th century. So I have no problem in terms of what lessons are we to learn from our forebears. We should honor their goals and recognize that they are still our goals. But I think we also have to learn from our forerunners' mistakes. We have to learn from mistakes about what will not accomplish those goals. And this is the chief lesson. Planning by an elite, no matter how well-intentioned they may be, will not achieve the historic goals of socialism. Nor will a retreat to markets when elite planning falters, as it inevitably will. Well-intentioned promises that market forces will be tamed or socialized, notwithstanding. I think those are the very important lessons we need to learn from the failures of those who went before us in the century past. Basically, the lesson we need to learn from our forebears is planning for the people is not the same as planning by the people. Serve the people is not the same as power to the people. Now, I'm not going to try and present all of the sort of key features of a participatory economy, although we certainly can talk about any parts of those that, in discussion, question, and answers afterwards. And I'm also not going to talk at any great length about how we've defined these goals. Well, I guess I'll say a brief word, because it's important how you conceptualize your goal in terms of what you would then come up with as a way to achieve it. We think it's very important when we're thinking about economic democracy to be clear about what we're trying to achieve. And what we think we should be trying to achieve is arranging decision-making procedures so that people have decision-making power in proportion to the degree that they're affected by a particular decision. And that's important because in economies, most decisions affect a number of people, but they affect some people more than others. In some sense, that's sort of the fundamental dilemma that we face when we're trying to achieve economic democracy. Sure, there are some decisions that affect all of us more or less equally. And it's not that difficult to figure out how would you make those decisions democratically, one person, one vote. Then there are some decisions that really only affect, one person or a couple of people. But the majority of economic decisions that have to be made affect a number of people, but unfortunately some more than others. And that's what makes, that's essentially the tricky part of achieving economic democracy. But the first thing that's really important is even understanding how tricky it's going to be to achieve economic democracy. Being clear about what that is helps you realize how clever you have to get about designing your decision-making procedures. Economic justice, and I'll be very brief on this. We think what economic justice is reward or compensation commensurate with the effort or sacrifice that people make when they work. And that's a very different conception of economic justice from those who feel that capitalism rewards people fairly. It's a very different conception of economic justice from that most, in the U.S. I would call them liberals, have about what's a fair system of rewarding people. But I do think that if you go out and sort of, in my experience, when I go and find the people who basically are the activists and militants in various movements that think of themselves as, we're an economic justice movement, we're fighting for economic justice. I think what they instinctively, whether they understand it or not, whether they're self-conscious about it or not, I think the gut feeling they have about what is fair and what is not fair is if somebody works harder, if somebody works in some sort of more dangerous circumstance, if somebody makes a greater sacrifice, then they deserve some more. Then they deserve more reward. But that's the grounds upon which maybe somebody should deserve more and somebody should deserve less. That's the defining criteria. We said, look, there's precious little human solidarity on the planet, in our societies. Wouldn't it be nice if the economic system promoted greater solidarity instead of undermining the precious little amount of human solidarity we have in the first place? We also said efficiency actually is important. And here is something where activists, understandably, start running for the exits. Whenever you start talking about, well, here's a feature in the economy, and it's important because it's going to help us make decisions efficiently. And there are reasons that this criteria, has fallen into disrepute, basically amongst humane people. One is that is commonly sort of equated with profitability. So the most common use of efficiency is to basically say, well, anything that's more profitable is more efficient. Basically, the words mean the same thing. This is just a total misuse of the concept of efficiency. Even for mainstream professional economists, that's not how efficiency is defined. Second reason that efficiency is something that most audiences, that are upset with capitalism don't want to hear anything about is professional economists basically make it the be-all and the end-all. These other goals, they care very little about, have very little to say about, and they always want to orient the debate over whether we should do this or that around what would be more or less efficient. They essentially take this one goal and just elevate it to being the only thing that matters, and that's a common practice amongst mainstream economists, and of course it rubs any human being with any degree of sensitivity the wrong way. So there's a second reason that a lot of people in audiences don't want to hear anybody talking about efficiency. But unfortunately, what efficiency really means is, if we have to do work that's not as pleasant as leisure, wouldn't it be a shame if it was just wasted? And we ended up having to do more work that wasn't that nice than we really should have because somebody was wasting our efforts. What it really means is, we only have a certain amount of scarce productive resources out there. And wouldn't it be a shame to have these scarce productive resources used in one activity or for one purpose, doing something that's not very valuable, that's not generating a lot of human well-being, when they would have generated a lot more human well-being if they'd been used in some other way? That's what inefficiency is. And ordinary people don't want to live in an economy that's inefficient. So that is something that when we design an economy and decision-making procedures, that is something that I think we do want to take care of, even though I know that amongst most left and active audiences, that's the last subject anybody wants to hear about. Finally, I think what we've learned from the past is that we want an economy that will promote and generate a variety of different economic lifestyles. People are different. What they want to do is different. That's good. We don't want something that somehow has a sort of a conforming influence. Well, I did the wrong thing, didn't I? That's different? Yeah. Okay. It's not a bad thing for you to have in front of you now. So I can first say what I'm going to talk about and what I'm not going to talk about. These are sort of the major institutions that define a participatory economy. What are the major institutions that define capitalism? Private enterprise, markets. Those are the defining institutions. Well, any economic system probably has some key defining institutions, and these are the ones. These are the ones, you know, that define a participatory economy. Democratic councils of workers and consumers. I'll talk about them a little bit, but they're more or less what you probably think they are. Jobs balanced for empowerment and desirability. That's a feature of this economy that's actually rather unique. It distinguishes this vision of a better economy from pretty much all versions of market socialism, not just from capitalism. And it's proven over the last 20 years to be highly controversial. Whenever this sort of system is discussed and debated amongst folks, all sorts of people raise questions about this, and we could have a whole session on that. But I'm not going to talk about that today. Remuneration according to effort. Well, okay, we said our conception of economic justice is that people should be rewarded if people work harder, longer, or under more difficult or dangerous circumstances. That is grounds for meriting some extra reward. Otherwise not. Well, the third sort of institution is we have an institution that's basically designed to make the judgments about how to reward people in a fair way. And then the last sort of defining institution of a participatory economy is this thing we call a participatory planning procedure. And that's what you came expecting me to present, explain, defend, and answer questions about, and that's what I'm about to do. Okay, how to introduce the issue of the planning. It's far from obvious how comprehensive democratic planning should be organized. As a matter of fact, I think many who champion democratic planning as the best alternative to markets and authoritarian planning are blissfully unaware that a lot of their ideas about how to go about it are actually seriously flawed. And I think this intellectual failing stems from some blind spots in traditional left thinking. Two blind spots in particular. Traditional socialist vision of democratic planning remains blind to the need to provide workers in enterprises and consumers in their neighborhoods with a considerable degree of autonomy over their own behavior. On the other hand, more libertarian socialist and anarchist visions are blind to the need for carefully designed procedures to help producers and consumers who should be autonomous in some regards, but not in others, plan activities that are highly interrelated. Anarchists and libertarians sort of don't recognize how important it is to carefully design procedures that are going to allow autonomous groups of workers and consumers, help them coordinate what is a very elaborate division of labor amongst themselves in ways that are efficient and equitable. They just think it'll happen magically. So I think those have been the two sort of historic blind spots in thinking. I mean, a penchant for avoiding serious, not to be confused with contentious debate over exactly what procedures are best suited for different categories of economic decisions has hidden these blind spots for far too long. It's not just that coordinating the activities of millions of different workplaces and neighborhoods democratically is hard to actually do in reality. Figuring out how to go about doing it in ways that encourage participation on the part of ordinary workers and consumers and leads to plans that are fair and efficient is also not a trivial intellectual task. And yet, most of the organized left has just basically not done any serious thinking on this subject. What's the challenge? The challenge is, when we're designing some way, when we're trying to come up with some participatory planning procedure, the challenge is how to empower worker councils and consumer councils while protecting the interests of others in the economy who are affected by what these councils do. The challenge is how to give groups of workers user rights over parts of society's productive resources without allowing them to benefit disproportionately from productive resources that belong to and should benefit everyone. That's the challenge. I was going to say a few words about sort of the historical legacy that we have to overcome of sort of apathy. But I think that's something that probably most of the people in this audience, are fully aware of. That when you look out there and you ask, well, is it going to be easy to involve people in really participating in the decision, making the economic decisions that affect their lives? Well, so many people for so long have essentially not been allowed to do that and have been told they're incapable of doing that. And in every conceivable way have been frustrated whenever they tried to do that. That there's a tremendous sort of historical legacy that we have to overcome. It's basically the historical legacy of capitalist alienation. And it's deep, and it's profound, and that's part of what it is that we have to overcome. But the price of failure is monstrous. If we can't overcome the historical legacy of people simply not insisting on participating and making the decisions, their economic decisions that affect their lives, the price of failure is monstrous. Biologists teach us that nature abhors an ecological vacuum, by which they mean that in complex ecological systems, any empty niche will quickly be filled by some organism or another. I think if there's a single history we should learn from human history, it's that society abhors a power vacuum. If people don't control their own lives, then someone else will. And I think if there's a single lesson we should learn from the history of 20th century socialism, it is that if workers and consumers do not run the economy themselves, then some economic elite will do it for them. So we have to overcome this historical legacy, but I am not under any illusions that it isn't an incredibly difficult task to do. So one of the important things in designing the procedures is to bear in mind, how much work we have to do here to actually create a system that is going to draw people into going ahead and embracing the idea that, yeah, I want to make the decisions that affect my lives. Well, what's the solution? First, and now we'll outline the procedures. What is this miraculous answer to this difficult challenge? Fortunately, it's actually easy to describe. Conceptually, the participatory planning is really quite simple. First of all, who are the participants in the planning process? That's important to identify. The participants are every worker council, every neighborhood consumer council, and any federations of consumer councils that we happen to create as well. So we have worker councils, consumer councils, and federations. That's who participates in the planning process. They're the only ones who ever make any proposals. They're the only ones who ever revise any proposals. There's no other agency or planning bureau that makes proposals, revises proposals, vetoes proposals. So that's very different from sort of previous conceptions about how you want to carry out planning. So those are the participants. There is one other participant that we're going to have to list here. And in anarchist audiences, it's just the third rail. And we need to get a better name for it. It's called the Iteration Facilitation Board. And it plays a totally perfunctory role. And if anarchists get very upset and say, oh, that's the Trojan horse, you've called it the Iteration Facilitation Board, I recognize that it's really the Central Planning Board, and Joe Stalin is sitting there, and you're just, trying to pull the wool over my eyes. My answer to that to audiences, the anarchist audiences, is, you want to get rid of it, I can take it out. I can replace it with an algorithm. There can be no people. But for today, let me use it, and then we can talk about it if you want to. So we've got workers' councils, consumer councils, federations. They're the only ones who ever propose anything. They're the only ones that ever revise anything. They're the only ones that ever vote on whether or not something is acceptable or, can happen or can't happen. But we do have this Iteration Facilitation Board. And the first thing that happens is, when we start planning in the first round of the sort of iterative social procedure, this Iteration Facilitation Board announces current estimates of the opportunity costs of all natural resources, all categories of labor, all capital stocks, machines, and facilities that we have at our disposal, and current estimates of the social cost of producing different goods and services, and also current estimates of the damage caused by emissions of different pollutants. So we have sort of an initial list of what does it cost society to use this particular natural resource? What does it cost society to use this machine because then it can't be used by somebody else to do something else? So we have an announcement of these initial opportunity and social costs, estimates of what they might be by the Iteration Facilitation Board. You can think of these estimates as kind of indicative prices, since they provide some useful indications of what it costs society when we use different primary resources, emit different pollutants, and what it costs society to produce different goods and services. They're all announced. Then what happens? Consumer councils and federations, and I'll come back to that part later. Consumer councils respond to this information by making consumption proposals. That is, they propose what goods and services they want to consume and what levels of emissions of pollutants that affect them they're willing to tolerate. Worker councils respond by making production proposals. That is, they propose what outputs they would produce, not only the useful goods and services they would provide, but also any emissions of pollutants that they want to emit, and the inputs they want to use to accomplish this, including not only intermediate goods they need from other workers' councils, but any of the natural resources or capital stocks that they would like permission to use in their production process. That's the first round. Consumer councils all responded to this information about what it costs society to use different things. Consumer councils said, well, we'd like to consume this under those circumstances. Production councils say, well, we'd like to do this production. We need these inputs. If we get these, if you agree we can use these, then we'll provide these outputs. The consumer councils provide one other piece of information when they make their consumption proposal. When they say this is what the Neighborhood Consumption Council wants, which includes all of the approved requests for families and also any of the sort of public goods that they want to consume as neighborhood public goods, like new sidewalks, new swing sets for the park in the neighborhood. They also report what is the average effort rating of all the people in our consumer council. So that's part of the proposal that they send in. Now, what happens? The Iteration Facilitation Board adds up all the offers to produce or supply or make available all the things that are out there. Adds them all up for every single item. and also adds up all of the requests, whether from consumers or other worker council, we need to have such and such. And they look to see, well, for each item, is there an excess supply? People haven't even asked to use all that's been offered. Or is there excess demand? That at this point in the planning process, in grand sum total, people are trying to use or saying they'd like to use more of something that then is actually going to be available, given the offers that are part of all these proposals. You basically, the Iteration Facilitation Board simply calculates to what degree there's a discrepancy between what people have asked for and what people are saying is available or what is available. And then they adjust the estimate of the opportunity cost or the social cost of making things. If there's excess demand, what we've discovered is, oh, the cost to society of making that available is actually higher than we thought. And they adjust it up. And if it turns out that when people tell you what they're willing to do and produce and what people want, you discover that there was an excess supply of something, well then obviously it costs society less to make it available than we thought, and they adjust the price down. So the Iteration Facilitation Board is just adjusting our estimates of these opportunity and social costs up and down. That's all they do. Then what happens? Then everybody looks at the new information that's more accurate about what it is that society, what it is that really costs society to do different things, and they revise their own proposal. This is key. Nobody has come in and said, okay, you made your first proposal. That was great. We like to have you doing that. But it doesn't fit together. So now the central planners, in a different conception, would come in and say, well, it doesn't fit together, and we have all the information that allows us to make that determination, so we're the ones that are going to have to tell you, you've got to revise your proposal, and you've got to revise it in this direction. That's not the proposal. We're proposing that doesn't need to be done, and that would be a very bad way to go about things. Instead, the councils revise their own proposals. Only they can revise their proposals. They resubmit. Now, at this point, it would be sort of a long discussion, that involves a lot of economics to talk about if this is the process, and this process goes on until what? Well, this process goes on until two things happen. This process goes on until the adjustments in the proposals that are basically sort of guided by the adjustments in the sort of signals, the price signals, until we finally have a plan that is what economists call a feasible plan. And that is, well, now there's actually finally going to be enough of everything so that everybody can do the thing they just proposed. So we have to have this process go on until there's a feasible plan. And one whole set of issues is, well, why do you think that this process would ever get to such a point? And that's where you need some help from professional economists. You need to look and see, well, can we look and see under what assumptions about technologies, under what assumptions about the kinds of preferences that people have for things? What are the assumptions that you would have to make in order to prove that if you kept doing this over and over again, at least in theory, you would eventually, inevitably arrive at a plan that actually could be carried out, what's called a feasible plan. And that's one of the pieces of work that Michael Albert and I did back in the early 90s. And we basically published that in, economic journals, academic, scientific economic journals. We published that work and said, under these assumptions, look, we can prove that this procedure would arrive at such and such. And one of the things I feel very, fortunate about is that in the 20-plus years since then, there's nobody that's come along and said, no, you were wrong, your theorem's wrong, you said you said you proved the theorem, and in fact, you made a mistake someplace. If you're asking, well, what are the assumptions that are necessary, I'll tell you two things about it. The assumptions that are necessary to prove that this will actually arrive at a feasible plan are fewer than the assumptions you need to make to prove that a market economy will arrive at a general equilibrium that will be an efficient outcome. So for the most part, we need to make the same kind of assumptions that economists make to prove that market economies work. With two exceptions, and they're very, very important exceptions. To prove that a market economy will actually achieve an efficient plan, you have to assume there are no externalities. And you also have to assume there's no public goods. And you don't have to assume either of those things for this planning process to arrive at an efficient plan. That's a very, very serious advantage from a very narrow efficiency perspective. So the first thing I can tell you about the assumptions is the list is shorter of what you have to assume to prove that this process will arrive at a feasible plan and that plan will be efficient. And in two major respects, you do not have to assume some things that market systems have to assume. And that's important because, in fact, those two assumptions you have to make to believe in a market economy are going to be efficient are wildly unrealistic assumptions. And we don't have to make those wildly unrealistic assumptions. The second thing I'll tell you about, well, when does this process end? Well, this process ends when all the other councils in the planning procedure look at the proposal that's come from everyone and say, we accept that. We agree that your proposal is socially responsible. We're not really interested in the details of what you're asking permission to do. We just want to know whether or not you are using scarce social resources, including labor resources that really belong to all of us, in a way that's socially responsible. And in terms of consumption plans, we don't care what you consume. We just want to know whether or not you are asking to be allowed to consume an amount that is warranted by the sacrifices and the work that your members have done when they were in the workplace. As long as a consumption proposal, the cost of providing what somebody wants to consume, is commensurate and measures up to what it is that they, sort of the right they earned to impose social cost on the rest of us because they bore some burdens of making goods and services. As long as somebody is doing that, well, then it's perfectly fair that they be allowed to do that. And as long as a workers' council is going to provide outputs, goods and services that benefit society more than the social cost of all the resources and capital equipment that they said they wanted to use to do that, as long as they're providing social benefits that are at least as great as the social cost that their proposal entails, then it's to the rest of our benefit to tell them, fine, go ahead and do it. So the other thing, that the process stops when we reach a feasible plan, and this process stops when the other councils look and see, yes, I can tell that you have made a socially responsible proposal, and you've made it, and you're the one that made it up, and you're the one that made the revisions, so presumably that's what you want to do, and I have got no problem with that. I don't have to tell you no. That's how the process ends. The real key is this. Let me see if it's the section on who says no. I can go right to that. One thing that you want to focus on in any sort of planning proposal, when you're trying to sort of figure out whether you like any sort of proposal about planning is, or any economy, there are going to be critical places where somebody has to say no to somebody. And if you want to be a nitpicker and you want to go for the jugular, you want to focus when you're really evaluating sort of whether you're going to buy or think of good ideas, if somebody has got a good idea or not. You want to try and sort of go to those places. So in the case of planning, one of the key places is, who's going to tell a group of workers that they can or can't do something? Who's going to actually say, oh, you said you wanted to do that, but you know, we're not going to let you. Who's going to be the we? Well, in this case, the we is going to be all of the other worker councils and all of the other consumer councils. It's not going to be some central planning board. Now that sounds like, wow, how can you do that? Well, you're going to have to make it awfully easy. In my workers' council, you're going to have to make it awfully easy for me to figure out whether I have any reason to object to what somebody else has proposed to do. And the procedure is designed, one of the major advantages of the procedure is it's designed to give that information. All one has to do is take the current estimates, the final estimates of the opportunity costs and the social costs of using different things. And I can see from any proposal from a workers' council, what is the estimated benefits to society that will come from what they say they're going to do? What is the estimated cost to society entailed in what they have asked to have permission to use? And if the benefits are greater than the costs, and if the number is sitting right there on a computer printout page in front of me, and it can be in pencil, it doesn't have to be a computer printout, well then, unless the numbers lie and there's something strange going on, I'm better off if you do what you just asked to. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time, thinking about it. I'm going to say, fine. And it's also very easy to look and see. Here's this neighborhood. They've said, families living there say they want all these things. The neighborhood is asking for new swimming equipment. How do I know they're not being greedy? Well, all I have to do is compare the cost of that entire package per person in the neighborhood with the average effort rating of people in that neighborhood. They've dealt with any differences between them already. So it's easy to see when consumption proposals are socially irresponsible because they're too greedy. It's easy to see when production proposals are socially responsible because they generate more benefits than they incur costs for society. It's easy for everybody to see, and that's why you can basically have everybody being the bad guy. You don't have to have a central planner that's a bad guy that says no. As a matter of fact, when you look into it deeply, the whole presumption, well, the only entity that could possibly decide when is a proposal socially irresponsible would be a central planning agency with a tremendous amount of information at its disposal. Ordinary people don't have that information. It turns out that one of the big problems with central planning is central planners actually can't get that information because there's so many disincentives for people to lie to them about what they can and can't do. So the common presumption that planners have had for most of the 20th century, that who is it that has to be the no-sayer and tell somebody they can't do something they want to? That it's somehow the central planners that are uniquely capable of doing that. They're actually uniquely incapable of doing that. And if you organize the planning procedure in an intelligent way, you can equip everybody to be in a position to very quickly decide when something should be or shouldn't be approved. Now let me talk. I'm going to close by sort of talking briefly about dangers to avoid in democratic planning. And then maybe part of the discussion will be whether or not we've succeeded in avoiding these dangers or maybe created some other problems. Authoritarian planning discourages workers' and consumers' participation because it disenfranchises them. It's fairly simple and straightforward. In a system of authoritarian planning, how is it that ordinary workers and consumers are discouraged from participating? Well, it basically doesn't let them participate. The important decisions are made by somebody else. So that's just disenfranchising. That's disenfranchisement. It's easy to sort of see and understand. Poorly designed systems of democratic planning might continue to discourage workers and consumer participation in different ways. If worker and consumer councils have no autonomous area of action regarding their own work and consumption activities, but must submit to seemingly endless discussion, debate, and negotiations about what they want to do with many others in many different planning bodies through representatives, well then ordinary workers and consumers may well lapse back into apathy even if there's no authoritarian planning procedure that's disenfranchising. I think that is a key danger that all of us good people who know we don't like markets and we don't like authoritarian planning and we want democratic planning, I think that's the key thing that we need to remember is the danger that we have to somehow cope with when trying to come up with a better alternative, whether it's the one I'm suggesting right now or any other, as a matter of fact. I think there's a serious danger that some forms of democratic planning can discourage participation on the part of ordinary workers and consumers by requiring them to engage in too much negotiation with others, especially if most of these negotiations are conducted by representatives. In this case, ordinary workers and consumers would no longer be disenfranchised as they are under authoritarian planning procedures. But if the procedures for involving all who are affected are cumbersome and clumsy, and if those procedures rely primarily on representatives, they may become a practical barrier to participation that only the most dedicated and determined workers and consumers will be willing to fight through. In other words, when poorly organized, democratic planning can become just another bureaucratic maze from the perspective of ordinary workers and consumers, leading to what a good friend of mine, a very well-known feminist socialist economist named Nancy Folbre, has warned to become a dictatorship of the sociable. Participatory planning is designed so workers and consumers councils can decide what they want to do as long as it does not misuse productive resources that belong to all or take unfair advantage of others. It's designed to help worker and consumer councils demonstrate to one another that their proposals are socially responsible by generating the information to form such judgments. It's designed to avoid unproductive and contentious meetings where representatives from different councils make proposals not only about what those they represent will do, but about what workers in other councils will do as well. The planning procedure may take a number of rounds before proposals are confirmed as fair and not wasteful of resources, and before excess demands are eliminated and a feasible plan is reached. We may have to go through a number of these rounds of proposal revision. But rounds in the planning procedure are not rounds of increasingly contentious meetings between representatives from different councils to debate the merits of different overall national production plans, without any of the necessary information to make informed decisions in any case. Instead, they are meetings inside each worker and consumer council and federation. And since they take place, the revision, the coming up with a proposal and revising the proposal, that takes place inside every workers' council. That means every worker can be involved in that decision-making process. So these meetings that are necessary during each round are taking place inside workers' councils, not delegates that workers' councils send to a meeting to make the revisions. And it's done in a context where you have clear guidelines about what will win approval from others. You need to know if the others have objected to what I just proposed, you need to have some clear guidelines about, well, what am I going to have to come up with, that will quickly meet with their approval. Unlike other models of democratic planning, councils never have to argue over someone else's ideas about what they should do. Only in rare and special circumstances do councils have to plead their case for what they want to do in meetings with others. And there's always a clear agenda for any meeting required to adjudicate any special appeals. About that. I think we're ready for discussion. Thank you.
Okay. So do we need a short break? Yeah? No? No, not really. Okay. So, first question.
Yes.
Point of view.
You had some experience, long experience in American University, and in Daniel Swervelin's book on economic democracy, it talks about how there was some kind of cooperative or democratic decision-making process in your Department of Economics. So my question is, A, could you say a little about that, what worked and didn't work, and B, how does that practical example relate to things that you may have learned or some of the processes that would be difficult to achieve? Do you see some relationship between this theoretical model and a practical case?
Okay. This is going to take us to... First of all, I know this person, and he knows me. We're friends.
I'm a friendly person, usually.
And we actually both lived and worked in D.C. for long periods of time. So he's aware of the history of the American University Economics Department, which back in the late 60s and early 70s, we had a lot of progressive economists and graduate students. I was one of the militant graduate students and used to drive the progressive faculty crazy by telling them that they were really not very progressive at all. But in any case, we had a kind of a revolutionary process in the department whereby we formed what we thought were to some extent democratic rules for department governance. And the part of the experience that's sort of relevant, and actually this is, I'm going to describe something to you that I think sort of highlights the problems that it highlights one of the problems in what we proposed here. And it's one that another faculty member in a leftist department who understands that leftists can be very contentious and disagree with one another, and that's difficult at sometimes. David Kotz is somebody who in particular, as a matter of fact, I can find it quickly and I'll read you his quote. This is an objection that he had to, this may not work out as smoothly as Robin Hahnel is trying to make you believe. Well, first of all, I'm not trying to make you believe it's going to work out smoothly. I mean, that's good. I'm glad I got to say that. I am not telling you that this is going to feel like heaven. I don't expect that that would be the case. It's more wonderful than anything we're really going to get, but it isn't heaven, and I don't see it as heavenly. Let's see if I can find the quote from Kotz very quickly. I believe I can. This is David Kotz, who's a really great political economist who taught for 35 years at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst. Says, anyone who has participated in a workplace with more than 2 or 3 workers knows the problem of cliques and rivalries that tend to arise. It is not clear how one would prevent cliques and rivalries from intruding into the effort evaluation process. He understands that because they also had a committee in his department where faculty basically voted on what other faculty's raises should be. And that was essentially the procedure that we also had at American University. So part of our democratic self-governance is we want to democratically come to a decision about whether somebody deserves a higher raise than somebody else. Now, part of the proposal here that I didn't talk about today is in workplaces, workers' councils would presumably need to set up something we called an effort rating committee, where if they feel that there is some reason that, if they feel everybody is working as hard as everybody else, then they don't need to engage in any process of saying that that's fine. On the other hand, if people are not convinced, at least initially, that everybody has worked as hard as everybody else and that maybe there were some differences, we say, well then what you need to do is set up an effort rating committee, and you need to sort of, every workers' council needs to give an effort rating to everybody, because that's going to become the basis of what it is that it's socially fair for you to be allowed to consume when you go to your neighborhood consumption council. So your effort rating in our model is like your income in capitalism. In capitalism, it's your salary income plus your dividend checks, which you don't get. I know you don't, some do. Plus the rent you get from all that property you own. I know you don't, but some do. that's your income, and that basically determines what it is you can consume, how much you can consume. Well, in this economy, for reasons of fairness, we've said it's basically any difference, it's your effort rating that earns you consumption rights. Well, how's this effort rating going to be done? And our proposal is every workers' council has to do it, and they can do it any way they want, including they can just say we don't want to do it. We give everybody the same effort rating. And that procedure was basically set up in my department at American University. It was set up in David Kotz's department up at UMass Amherst. And you know what? Sometimes it doesn't work very well. Now, in fact, we didn't really have effort rating committees because the criteria we were told to use was not, did somebody work longer hours? Did somebody teach more classes? Instead, the criteria we were supposed to use, we were supposed to judge how valuable was what each of us did. And let me tell you, that turned out to be very contentious sometimes. And again, what I would say is, and in the chapter that talks about this particular part of the proposal, ultimately my answer to David Kotz was this: David, I know the history of your department. You know the history of my department. You're basically saying this kind of thing can be contentious. You're absolutely right. Somebody famous, I believe it was Winston Churchill, once said, you know, democracy is absolutely the worst form of government, except for all the alternatives. So what's the alternative? Well, one alternative is we don't try and reward people fairly. We reward them some other way. Well, if you want to reward people fairly, then you have to try to do that. Then the question is, well, who's going to make the judgment calls about what's fair? And one choice is we're just going to have to leave it to workers to do that amongst themselves in their workplaces. Does that mean that when I'm thinking about applying for jobs someplace in a participatory economy, well, do I want to work here or do I want to work there? Where do I want to become a member in a workers' council? One of the first things that a sensible person should look at is, what are they using for their sort of effort rating procedure? What are their effort rating procedures? And do I find them compatible and comfortable with the way I want to be treated when I'm in my work? And some people, I believe, will say, you know, over here, they're just giving everybody the same effort rating. And I'm not really sure, I'm not very comfortable with that. I think I might be working very, very hard, and some other people might not be under those circumstances, and I wouldn't be very comfortable in a workplace where that was the procedure. I would like some, you know, I think we need sort of a more serious attempt to have self-testimony, self-evaluation, go and talk to the people that the person worked with, make sure that they confirm, yes, they were working as hard as they just told you were. So how elaborate the procedures are, what the procedures are, whether the effort rating is just pass, fail, or, you know, 99 versus 101. Different workplace, I would be very surprised if workers in different workplaces didn't come up with sort of a variety of different ways of going about this. And presumably, you would look and search, amongst other reasons for wanting to work here rather than there, you would look for one that was compatible with you. But yes, I think there's a good point to raise about this issue. In the process of trying to reward people fairly in an economy, what do we really have to do? Well, first we have to decide what's the fair criteria. There's a lot of debate that can go on over that. And the second is, well, even if we've decided what the fair criteria is, then we have to sit down and figure out what's the best procedure. And I would defend this procedure as the absolute worst possible way to decide, with all sorts of rivalries and cliques perhaps arising, except anything else would be worse. Okay.
Another question. Yeah.
Yes. How do you think that the society could stick together with this planning? Could it not be so that it's shattered or fractured? And I have another question. Yes, because if there can be groups who decide, yes, we are going to be our own group here, and so you can dissolve everything. Or is that,
Okay.
do you mean that this could be implemented in some main form of or basic society, and you have this in certain areas of the economy?
Okay.
Or how, what do you mean?
What I'm talking about here is, could you run a national economy this way? This is a proposal for running the Swedish economy. It's a proposal for running the Bangladeshi economy. It's a proposal for running the U.S. economy. So yes, it's a proposal. You say, well, some of those countries are very large. Some of those countries are very small. Some are less developed. Some are more developed. I think it's a proposal that I see no particular reason that, because you're large or you're small or you're more or less developed, that this way of going about things is necessarily not appropriate for you, or not something that you should, you can certainly easily consider and think about the pros and cons of. So that's an answer, I think, is one part of your question. We're talking about national economies here. Could a country do something this way? Another thing I think you may be asking about, however, is this. Well, wait, you've talked about it as if, well, we've got these workers' councils and these. How do these workers' councils get formed, or how could new workers' councils? What if somebody wanted? And here, this is an excellent question, and here's the answer. The question is, well, suppose I look at all the workers' council out there, and I'm trying to figure out where to apply to become a member, and I don't like any of them, and I'd like to start a new one. Can I do that? Absolutely. What if I'm working someplace and, we have to discuss what we're doing, and I put in my 2 cents, and I get outvoted all the time? Actually, the ultimate answer to his question about American universities is even more damaging to my argument. I in particular felt like my fellow faculty members were absolutely screwing me in terms of what they voted to pay me every year. And eventually, that's partly the reason I left. I also lost every single argument for 33 years over how we should do things. And I got frustrated. And I left. That's what people do. When you don't like what it is that's going on when you're working, then you look to go someplace else. So suppose I look to go someplace else, and suppose I don't find any place else that I think is going to be any better. And as an academic, I already knew there wasn't any place. They were all going to be equally. They were all going to be awful, not equally so. And Portland State University is certainly no tremendous improvement over American University. Well, but if you don't like what's going on in your workplace, can you sort of start up a new one? Absolutely, you can start up a new one. So, well, how do you do that? How do you start?
Do you not think that the companies and when you're taking big decisions, long-term decisions in an area or a company or on a state, that it can be impossible, or do you see any risk of that? That it can,
well,
everything can be dissolved?
Let me answer that quickly and then go back to something that your first question really touched on. The procedure, what I'm claiming is that we have good procedures to allow everyone to know whether when a group of workers proposes to do something, whether there's good reason for the rest of us to object to it. And I'm also arguing that's all we really want to know. That I don't want to tell you what to do in your workplace. I just want to be sure that what you're doing is socially responsible. It's not doing something that, it harms me if you went ahead and did it. And as long as you've given me an easy, quick way to sort of make that judgment call, then that's all I need to know in terms of whether or not I can give permission, happily and readily for you to go forward. Now, think about how is it new enterprises come into being in a capitalist economy. Can you start up a new company? Yes. One way is you're incredibly wealthy, so you have all the money you need to go out and buy all the inputs you need to start up a new company. You're the only owner, sole proprietor, incredibly wealthy. That's the simple way. That's not the way it usually happens, though, right? Instead, what happens is, well, it's going to be a group of people who get together who have the financial wherewithal to put up the initial capital. They're going to have to go to a bank. They're going to have to sell the bank on the idea that this is going to be a good project. So it's basically banks, the financial markets that help you with initial public offerings, have a bunch of wealth yourself. And when you do all that, that's how new enterprises, or that's how new private capitalist enterprises are born in a capitalist economy. How are new enterprises born in a participatory economy? Well, a person or a couple of people or a handful of people, maybe who are the dissidents in this workers' council who've been voted, whose ideas have been voted down by the majority year after year, they say, come on, we really do have a better idea about how to do this. Let's leave and form our own. Yes. Can you do that? Yes. How do you actually get the resources to put your ideas into action? You participate in the participatory planning process. You basically say, we're a new workers' council, we're going to participate, we're going to be making proposals, and if our proposals get accepted, that means everybody has said, we agree to allow you to use the resources that you've just said you needed. I don't have to raise my, it's not my own personal wealth that I'm using to buy the things that I need to start up this new business. I'm participating just like everybody else does in the process of saying, all of those productive resources you need to produce anything belong to any and all of us. And anybody that wants to use them gets access to them by participating in this process whereby everybody else says, okay, you've made a proposal, and now, what if you participate in this planning process and you make a proposal, you revise it, you make it, you revise it, and you never get everybody else to agree and say that's socially responsible? Or what if you've been an enterprise for a number of years? Here's where the who says no. There are situations where, in an economy, it would be a good thing if somebody told somebody no. Well, one of those situations is, you got a group of workers over here. What they want to do is to produce a bunch of stuff that nobody wants, or they want to produce things and use, incredibly valuable, important resources to produce something that's just not nearly as valuable as what somebody else would do with those resources. That's when you want to tell people, no, we don't want to let you do that. So, in the end, if you have an existing or a new workers' council, and in the end, that workers' council cannot get an approved proposal, then they don't get the resources to use because they would misuse them. Now, what happens to those individuals? And here is where I say, you go to Sweden in 1975 and you look and see at the ways they dealt with what happens to somebody who's got a job in an industry, the shipbuilding industry, and now we're not building ships in Sweden anymore. Instead, we're doing something else. It's in a different part of the country. Well, Sweden and social democracy, came up with a brilliant way to handle. Sometimes there's changes in what we produce and where we produce it. And those changes are good or those changes are necessary. But that doesn't mean the person who was working there, who loses their job with the company they were working with, that doesn't mean they should personally bear the cost of the adjustment. So retraining programs, education programs, funding income for while you're being retraining, relocation benefits, all of that stuff is important, great, good stuff. And if people have been working in one workers' council and they've been getting approval for years and now they somehow can't figure out a way to use scarce social resources as well as other people, the procedure is designed to be able to, the procedure is designed so they will be told no. But that doesn't mean that the people in that council have to bear the personal cost of the transition. The other thing that's important is, one of the advantages of a planned economy is, this feasible plan we come up with, in it there's actually a job for everybody. So, if it's not where you were, it's not like there isn't a job that would work and be available for you. So it's a matter of basically coordinating that replacement in a way that minimizes the personal cost to individuals that have to move from one enterprise to another. That's what's entailed.
Okay, we have some more questions.
Yeah. What do you say about basic income?
From others?
And I'll try and make my answers shorter too.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Good thinking. Yeah. Yeah.
All right. Well, this discussion is based around using natural resources and relocation of resources and human resources. But a lot of the work today are not based on actually producing physical stuff anymore. It's a lot about coming up with algorithms, or as they like to call it, intellectual properties and so forth. Wouldn't there be a risk, or I would like you to help me to overcome this mental barrier of seeing that small firms consisting of only 2-3 people, only using a computer and a desk as their own resources, might sidestep the need for a workers' union. I mean, if you go to a workers' union for a large company, you might be perhaps 30 to 300 people coordinating your efforts towards a common goal. But these small companies might not even have the interest to join these workers' unions. And these companies will intermingle and cooperate with themselves. How do you see a way to get this new economy, in quotes, into this participatory economy?
It's a good question. This is another instance of it. This is a good point for me to make. This is an important point that I want to make, and this is an excellent opportunity to do it. So I know I'm not answering your question. I'm going to immediately, but I will. What is it we really need to accomplish here to move forward? I'm stepping back and thinking about political process. If we want to sort of successfully move forward in the 21st century and sort of overcome historical failures, what is it we have to do? Well, one of the things we have to overcome is skepticism on the part of the general public that people who don't like capitalism actually have a better idea. And we have a bad track record because many of us, I'm actually not guilty of this. I'm happy to say when I'm guilty. I was never guilty of pointing to the Soviet Union and saying that's what I want instead of American capitalism, or Cuba, or China, or any of the rest of them. But a lot of us did. So we have a bad sort of reputation on the subject. We lack credibility about do they really have a better idea. Well, how do we overcome that? By dramatically improving the quality of our thinking about better alternatives. And that's really what we're about here. So is this the alternative? Probably not. Or at least not exactly like this. The whole point is to sort of challenge ourselves to embrace a task that we have historically, done a poor job of. And this also is not the same as we're going to decide how people 20 years from now who decide to do a different economy have to do it. That's a ridiculous notion. We're dictating to them how they're going to have to do things. No. It's a question of, but we are helping pre-think amongst ourselves and sort of actually we need to have thought clearly about problems that will arise and possible answers and the pros and cons of those answers. And that's what we need to demonstrate to enough people so that we can build majoritarian support for economic system change at some place in the future. So I think it's important to understand that. Now, what about this question? Here we have, so we would call this the formal economic system now is the participatory economy, and all of these productive resources are basically being distributed, and groups of workers are being given user rights over these particular resources through the participatory planning process. Well, in the old central planning economies, there was always the question that, it usually came up in the form of a black market. What do you do about a black market? You've asked it in a slightly different way. Instead of, well, what do you do if people start trading goods, not through the official stores or according to the official exchange rate? What do you do? my big answer to that question is this the formal economy. If the formal economy is good, and if it's doing the things that I'm claiming it is, then if somebody goes out there and starts to do something outside these procedures, go ahead, let them. Because the alternative is, what's the alternative? The alternative is arresting them. Whenever you actually get to the point where you say, if somebody starts to do something that sort of we didn't want to have happen, well, are you going to arrest them, or are you going to let them do it? Or are you going to not arrest them, but somehow, instead of ignoring it, you're going to make some sort of a public campaign that sort of points out that this is going on and rely on sort of social pressure, to sort of let people know, we know you're doing this, but you're actually being very unfair to the rest of us. Now, what you've actually proposed, I think there's no objection to. You've said, well, what if you don't need any resources? What if you don't need to ask for any of those resources that belong to all of us that we're figuring out how to use in the big plan? What if you can go ahead and just, without asking for any of that, you can do things and you produce products, because we're talking about producing services, not just goods. And more of what the main economy, the participatory economy, would be producing going forward is things we would call services rather than physical goods anyway. But yes, we live in a technological age where it appears that small numbers of people, without necessarily needing a lot of those important social resources, could probably do a decent amount of certain kinds of service production. What if they just sort of want to go to do that and don't involve themselves in the... I think that's fine. It's sort of, there's an easy answer.
Yeah.
It's not hurting the rest of us. If they want to do it, they can do it. And the last thing in the world you want to do is go out there and think you have to somehow repress it or police it or arrest them or tell them they can't do it.
And this is the short answer.
That was the short answer.
First, just a short reply. I think there is the issue also of the effort rating that, let's say you're designing websites. I mean, as long as people value your work, you will get an income. So the question is more maybe about the balanced job. Maybe your job is a little bit too attractive, and then you will get a slightly lower income than someone working in a coal mine or something.
Well, there's also the... think about it. If you're not in the formal economy, then you're not going to have an effort rating. Which means that you don't have an effort rating when you go to the Consumption Council to say, I want to consume such and such. Now, it may be, and my guess is that we do have a problem I didn't talk about, which is, well, wait a minute, I've talked about a situation in which I'm assuming everybody's a worker. And everybody's a worker in one of the formal workplaces that are sort of recognized as part of the economy. We've got children who are in school, we've got people who are retired, we've got disabled people. How do they get permission to consume? And the answer is, of course, you have to have allowances for all those people. And so you're going to have some sort of democratic, reasonable decision-making process. Think of it as a political democratic decision. What's the retirement age? Is it lower or higher? What's the sort of automatic... How do you calculate what somebody's retirement consumption rights should be? Should they be the same as their average effort rating over their work life, or should it just be the same for everybody? Should it be more or less generous? Same thing with disability, same thing with children, same thing with children allowances. All of that, obviously has to happen. So in the case of these people, so we got, can I make them guys, not girls? They always are. So we got these two guys out there, and I don't really want to be part of the whole economy, and we've already got our laptops, and we're pretty clever, and we're going to go ahead and do this. Presumably, they would have a formal consumption right that's only equal to the right of, no, you weren't disabled, no, you hadn't retired, no, you weren't a child, you're supposed to be working, but you just said I don't want to. how much consumption allowance are we going to allow you so you don't starve to death? There's going to be an answer to that, I think, that certainly the Swedes would come up with a positive number, not 0. Which is fine, and how high the positive number is fine. If you make the positive number high enough, are you going to provide an extra incentive for people to go ahead and do exactly what you're suggesting? Yes. Would I care? I wouldn't care. It would be okay anyway. It is true that you're going to be, if people are paying you for your web services, that's how you're substituting for the fact that you don't have a formal effort rating to get your consumption right, and that would be what's going on, but I think that's okay.
Exactly. And let me just point out, the reason why I'm asking this question is that it's hard enough these days to get people in the IT sector, in the biomedicine sector, all sorts of areas where people are using their brains and their laptops to join the union, because they don't find a reason to join the union. Because, well, I'm on my own, nothing else can help me, I'm an isolated entity and I work as a genius, basically. So that's the problem I'm having with this informal, or the intellectual property rights area of the economy today, because it's very hard to organize these isolated cliques of people. So what I'm looking for is a better way to get these people involved in the commune.
But notice the opportunity that they've been offered.
Yeah.
Do they have to raise? They don't have to raise money, come up with their own money, or take a loan out from a bank to start an enterprise. Why not just form a little new workers' council and participate in the planning process? And you'll probably be allocated the resources you ask for. And then you're saying, well, if you give us that, we'll be delivering these services, and the other people get. What's wrong with? Why avoid that? And I think what you're discovering is that a lot of people doing this thing in the present reality are doing it because they don't have this actually easier opportunity where people are inviting them to do exactly what they're doing as part of the whole way we're doing everything. Yes.
Can I just fill on this? To give a concrete example.
Okay.
I'll give a concrete example on this because for who was it? Yeah, because for example nowadays, we know all the problems. In a participatory economy, most likely, at least there would be incentives for it. That, for example, web designers and people working on say, let's say, creative field, they could come together to ask for more, for example, server farms, for shared, very high-quality cameras, and so on. Because they could together say, just as people are trying to do today, but it's very difficult, they could say that there are a group of us, and we would do, insane amounts of stuff with this. If we could have this server farm, if we could, for example, to this area build a really high-quality, really fast internet connections, and they would have much more negotiating power than nowadays, because nowadays they would have to convince the investors, whereas in a participatory economy they would have to convince the neighborhood.
Or be willing to work for a big international company like Intel, where you've got actually you've got a very nasty boss that's going to insist that you're going to have to work 80 hours a week, and you do it, and then finally you get sick of it and you leave.
So,
yes. I want to know your thoughts about globalization, because it's very complicated. You don't have a democratic council, different laws, different ways. All these goals you're talking about, it doesn't apply. And I see it's a big threat. So could you please talk about it? How does it work? Or your options?
National participatory. Suppose every country in the world adopted an economic system like this. First of all, that says nothing about their political system internally. It says nothing about, their culture. So this is not an answer to all social problems, even inside a single country. It's just some ideas to think about in terms of how we could really organize the economic part of our societies, in a far more desirable way. Second thing is, so suppose every country, adopts this economic model. That doesn't mean we still don't have to have international negotiations over all sorts of things that affect, many countries. I mean, the first one that comes to mind is is climate change. You'd still have to have international negotiations over climate change. In my opinion, you'd still have to have a treaty by which countries agreed to mutually agreed to binding reductions in the carbon emissions coming from each of their participatory economy. In my opinion, we would need to still have something like that. Now, I think if countries had economies that were more like this, where sort of a notion of justice and fairness is such an integral part of what's driving everything, what's sort of this, that's the glue that's holding it together. And what's the glue that holds capitalism together? Basically, fear and greed. Those are the driving elements. The glue that holds this kind of economy together is participation. Everybody's getting to decide, what it is they want to do, and they're doing it fairly, and they're being very careful about what fair means. So when you approach climate change, if you approach climate change and you're thinking about fairness, when solving the problem, you immediately come up with something that is very similar to the greenhouse development rights framework, where Kyoto said, and the greenhouse development rights framework allows you the way to really to put it into very concrete practice. Well, some countries bear more of the responsibility for having created the problem. And some countries, compared to others, have greater capacity. That is, they're just wealthier. They're not totally underdeveloped, just struggling for survival. Some countries have greater capacity for contributing to solving the problem. So if we had countries that had, if justice is a big part of the glue that's holding your economic system together, I think it's easier to imagine that when we sit down in negotiations in places like Copenhagen and Kyoto over how are we going to adjust the size and percentage reduction that these different national economies have to commit to in order to avoid broiling ourselves to death by mid-century. I think it'd be easier to actually imagine those delegations coming to an agreement that says, well, the U.S. has to have a much greater reduction compared to China, which has to have a much more moderate reduction because their GDP per capita is still much lower. They also didn't put nearly as much of what's up there up until, for a lot of time period. And then the Republic of the Congo shouldn't have to reduce at all for the next 10 years because they're just trying not to die. I think it would be a lot easier to get the kind of agreement that is both an effective solution to the problem and a fair one, if we had all these but you'd still have to have something like that happen. This doesn't answer that. There's one other thing that comes up in terms of international. What if I'm Ghana and we decide to reorganize our economy this way, and the rest of the global economy still works pretty much the way it is? Is this, because I've done this, does it make it impossible for me to interact or relate with the rest of the global economy? And the answer is no. Can you still engage in trade if you're a participatory Ghana economy? You export this in exchange for that import. If you've got a comparative advantage in something and it really is good development strategy for you to specialize, can you still do that? How do you negotiate? Well, if you're Ghana and you're poor, you try and get the best terms of trade you can possibly get, and that does not in any way contradict any of your operating principles as long as you're trading with countries that are wealthier than you. There's one little trick, though. If Sweden adopts this, and I happen to think Scandinavians are very good at this, I think you already do this. I think your societies have already incorporated some sort of sense of fairness in terms of global situations. If Sweden adopted this and it started trading with Ghana, whether Ghana was a participatory economy or, a little post-colonial capitalist enclave, I think it would be destructive of the Swedish system if Sweden didn't agree to terms of trade that allowed Ghana to get more than 50% of the efficiency gained from the trade. So wealthier participatory economies would have to self-consciously agree to, even if you could drive a harder bargain and get a better deal, even if Sweden was in a position to get 90% of the efficiency gain from trade with Ghana, it would really erode the sort of justice element that is the glue that's part of what's holding your entire economic system together. It would be both unfair and, I think, destructive. But there's no reason that individual participatory economies can't engage in the international economy in perfectly sensible, ways that they can go about it.
I have a question for you, but let me go first. Yeah.
Well, I want to raise a question from a more practical business point of view, to my view. If you are doing business with a firm, you like to speak to someone with some power. And this is not an issue of fairness, really. It's about speed and responsibility. And as I have understood your model here, you're producing a quite slow decision process, since many people should be involved and guaranteed their voice and so on. And that's charming in its way, but how do we do business?
Okay. The process that I'm describing is basically a process that takes place a month or so before the year begins. Any planned economy basically comes up with a plan, and the process, whatever the process is, whether it's the central planners or whether it's this social iterative planning procedure, the process has to precede the time period when the plan is supposed to be applied. So however long these procedures take to come to agree to a plan, they basically take place before this is now being carried out. In terms of if I'm receiving something, so suppose your company suppose the plan calls for your company to be delivering something I need in my company. If you're talking about, well, you need to really have people who can speak with authority and can carry out a commitment in the communication process of how that, the sort of details of how that happens. I don't think that's a problem. That just means inside every workplace, they have to sort of designate that somebody can speak with authority for that workplace with regard to when we're going to ship something and et cetera. I don't think that's, cooperatives do that in today's world. Mondragon's a successful cooperative. They have to do that. I don't think there's any great difference there. There is a question of how do adjustments get made during the year? Because, of course, things never turn out the way we thought they would when we made the plan. And that's one interesting question. And one of the things that people who argue for market systems argue is, well, a market system has an easier time making midstream adjustments, whereas planned systems have a more difficult time making midstream adjustments. And I don't want to give such a long answer. I would just say I think there's answers to that. I think there's also procedures that we actually talk about in the book and explain how things could be done. I don't want it would take longer to do it, but mostly I just want to say that's an important question to ask. Who says no on this subject? Who says no on that subject? And when things turn out different from what everybody thought, how do the adjustments get made? Those are the hard questions that need to be asked. Those are the hard questions the left has never historically asked and thought through and sort of analyzed seriously, which is why we have such low credibility amongst the general public on the subject of whether we have any idea what we're talking about when we talk about alternatives to capitalism.
So, if you're awarded according to effort, what is your stand on incentives for innovation and stuff like this?
Okay. Suppose we reward people this way. Is that going to cause problems, incentive problems at some point in the system? First of all, notice that there are material incentives for people to try hard rather than not try hard. Or at least potentially there are, and we're suggesting it's perfectly reasonable for workers in a workplace to establish those incentives. You don't get rewarded the same as somebody who didn't work as hard as you. So there's a very material incentive to work hard. In a very simple way, I'd say, well, that takes care of sort of one of the major issues. Because what is it I have control over in terms of whether or not what I do is socially valuable? Do I have control over whether I've got a high or low IQ? Do I have control over whether or not, at this point in time, do I have control over whether I went to school and got advanced education? No, basically what I have control over is how hard I try. Well, we have very clear incentives that we are recognizing and saying they would be important, that would encourage people to try and discourage people from not trying very hard. Now, that's not the same as innovation, though. And that's, again, a question that people have raised, and there's sort of a lengthier treatment in the book. A lot of innovation takes place in research and development facilities and operations. And a lot of innovation is basically a public good. Well, one of the claims that we're making for this system is it is not, like a market system, going to discriminate against providing resources for public goods. And to the extent that innovation is a public good, then if this system encourages the production and consumption of public goods, it would automatically have a big step up on market economies in terms of encouraging the kind of innovation that would go on in research and development councils. You've got these federations, you've got these industry federations, and you've got these consumer federations. And basically, in reality, one of the things they would do is they would have very elaborate research and development facilities whose resources they were asking for during the planning process. And presumably, we would get a lot of our innovation there. Now, here's the place that's tough, though. So we got good incentives for people to work hard as individuals. I think we've got more than adequate incentives to make sure that we allocate a lot more of our resources to research and development, because to the extent that it's a public good attached to federations. I also like the idea that consumer federations are in a position where they can engage, they can be in charge of research and development, not just producers' federations. Right now, it's only the corporations that have the money to do the research and development. Well, we're basically proposing to empower the consumers, and if they want to have research and development about things they might like as consumers, they have federations where they can do that rather than leaving it to corporations to sort of, try and manipulate what it is that they're going to have to choose from in the future. But here's the difficult point. The difficult point is, what are the incentives for an enterprise to come up with sort of new and more clever ways to do things? Well, it depends. Our proposal actually is that, unlike in a capitalist economy where you patent that, and then you reap the reward of the patent, over a period of 7 or 20 years, we're saying that generates a tremendous amount of inefficiency. People don't understand that. Patents generate a tremendous amount of static inefficiency, because by definition they mean somebody has a better way of doing something and nobody else gets to use it for a long period of time. What could be more inefficient? So if you want to maximize static efficiency, you want to make sure anytime somebody's come up with a better way of doing something, everybody else can do it that way if they want to. And we believe that's important, and we would propose that. But if everybody else gets to use it as soon as I figure it out, then does that diminish the incentive for me to use it to some extent? And here the answer is, it may to some extent. And if that proved to be a problem, then it would be an important consideration. Well, are we going to basically provide sort of extra material rewards for for enterprises or workers' councils that come up with better ideas, which we then share immediately with everybody else that can use it? And I think that's just something that would have to be dealt with when the time came.
One last question.
Yeah, I think one problem in the capitalist model and potentially a non-capitalist model is a separation of this, power and knowledge. For example, in this country, they had this thing called the Million Program, where they made all this housing, and everybody had equally mediocre housing. And as you pointed to the case of these cliques in academia, you can have 30 left-wing people in the department, and some people have better ideas and worse ideas. And just the democracy does not guarantee it. So isn't there a need to, through ethics or exit options, you sort of suggested, like leaving a company, to guarantee that these